presidency. And we just wanted to thank you all for coming. I know it's hot outside, it's Saturday, at like 24 hours notice, but the turnout is amazing. And in reading the amazing work that you all do, it's just so powerful to have this group of people here. It really is a listening opportunity for us and for Beto. This campaign is different and unique in that way. I am a community organizer at heart. That's how I started. And when I was thinking about who I wanted to support and help, it was Beto, because Beto does these type of events all over the country. It's about people. It's about not leaving no one else behind. And to be here, Cancer Alley, with all of you doing all of the amazing work is just so meaningful to us. And so we just really wanted to thank you. And I'll turn it over to Chuck in a second, but Chief Capel wanted to open up the conversation with a prayer. So Chief, I'll hand it over to you.
Felito, como sea, en este cheque, como si bonjour, como si coffee, Nico Omas. Hello, welcome. I'm Chief Capella of United Home Nation. I thank the Creator for this day and for gathering us. So we'll open up with a prayer song. I won't be able to stay with the whole thing because I got an engagement, so that's it. One of the great representatives of the United Home Nation.
So thank you, good morning, and welcome to Thrive Ninth Ward Community Center. And we're so happy to have you here, but more importantly, we're excited to have Beto here with us this morning to have a conversation about issues that are so dearly and nearly important to the people of New Orleans, and that's environmental justice. Beto, you're going to hear, you have some of the best and brightest and folks that have been in the trenches for many, many years as it relates to environmental justice in our city. Many of us are joined at the hip, many of us are like family as we go through this process together. A little bit about what I do. I'm Chuck Morris. I'm the Executive Director of Thrive New Orleans. And our role, our motto is helping people go from surviving to thriving. We do that through small business development. We do that through the community center here in the Ninth Ward, where we try to bless and meet the felt needs of people in the Ninth Ward of the Desire and Florida community. We do it through economic development, through small business, of course, but also through workforce development. And last but truly not least, as Sister Morris would say here, we have housing, and we try our best to figure out affordable housing in the St. Rock community. That being said, we're here today to celebrate and have a great conversation and letting Beto know the needs as it relates to New Orleans and the region as it relates to environmental justice. So welcome. I'd like to say to you also, this facility is open to each and every one of you. So if you ever need to use this space, please feel free to reach out and let me know. So welcome, and we're so glad to have you here, and we look forward to a robust and hearty but informative conversation today with Beto. So welcome, and we're glad you're here, and I'm really excited to be part of this family of folks that are fighting for environmental justice. So thank you and welcome.
Why don't we do a round of introductions, and then Beto, after everyone just introduces themselves and maybe say a few words, and then we can open up the conversation. And we don't have a lot of time, so just name and organization, if you can do that. And do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Angela Chalk with Health Community Services, so nonprofit located in South Florida. Bonjour, I'm Colette Chandala with the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. We work Texas to Florida, located in Louisiana.
Lenore Carroll, I'm the administrator for the United Foundation. Logan Atkinson-Burke with the Alliance for Affordable Energy. We work on energy issues across the state of Louisiana.
Dana and I'm with the Urban Conservancy. We are an island-based nonprofit.
Happy Johnson, public advocate and author. I'm here with the Lower Ninth Ward Center for Sustainable Engagement.
Hi, my name is Grace Morris. I'm here with Megan Schneider. We're both students at the University of North Carolina.
And my daughter.
Yeah. Lisa Darius, Greater New Orleans Foundation. That's our community partnership with 13 parish regions. I'm Allison Deer. I'm the Senior Water Manager at Propeller, and New Orleans-based nonprofit that works with homeowners.
I'm Julia Kamari-Drafton. I'm the CEO of Founder of Access Change. We mobilize community stories and data to inform preparedness, infrastructure, and adaptation.
Liz Williams-Russell, I manage the coastal climate portfolio for our foundation in Louisiana. We're a statewide philanthropic organization grounded in racial equity and justice.
James Logan, I'm a program officer with the Greater New Orleans Foundation, working primarily in environment and workforce.
Good morning. My name is Andrenica Morris. I'm with Housing NOLA and the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance and Housing Louisiana. And those three groups are working across the state to end the city and state's affordable housing crisis.
I'm Dee Dee Green. I work with the American Friends Service Committee's Peace by Peace New Orleans program, and I also sit on the Climate Action Equity Advisory Group representing Council District 8.
Good morning, my name is Catherine Prevost, and I'm the president of Upper Ninth Ward Bunny Friend Neighborhood Association.
I'm Keith Twitchell, I'm the president of Committee for Better New Orleans, which mostly works on community engagement, and I'm also chair of the board of the Greater New Orleans Water Collaborative, which is kind of an umbrella organization advocating for green infrastructure in the green parish area. Thank you.
Todd Reynolds, I'm the executive director of Groundworks New Orleans. We do workforce development through green infrastructure training.
Rashida Ferdinand, executive director of Sankofa Community Development Corporation. We're a community-driven planning and development organization to revitalize the North Ninth area.
Why don't we go to the back over there?
Hi, I'm Kim Ryer. I'm with the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. We focus on the challenges and opportunities around coastal land loss in our state.
I'm Emily Buxton, also with the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana.
Juliet Nieto, with another Gulf is Possible, based in Texas and in Florida.
Chief Capella, United Homination.
Hey, I'm Emma Collin, work with Colette at the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, Climate Justice Organization, and also.
Andreas Hoffman, Green Light New Orleans, large-scale sustainability.
Hi, I'm Andrea Chen. I'm the, sorry.
No, that's
I thought you said that's it.
No, it's on the name tag, I'm sorry. David Bocage, a member of the Pontoon Neighborhood Association, as well as director of the Cure Bottles New Orleans program through the Department of Health.
And your cousin.
Hi, Andrea Chen, also with Propeller, and I work with Allison.
Tyrone Warren, Vice President of Green Infrastructure.
Lisa Richards, volunteer for Beto for America.
I'm Yasmin, I work with Julia.
Hello, my name is Cynthia Cannon. I'm with Betty's team.
Hi, I'm Annie Pollard, and I'm a volunteer with Beto.
Evan Tanner with Betty's team.
Betty Schneider,
generation.
Let me begin by thanking each of you for making the time to join us, as Chuck said, on a Saturday, on short notice, but to come together on one of the most important issues we could be organizing around right now. So just grateful to each of you. To Chief Capel for beginning this meeting in the most powerful way that I could imagine, for your kindness, for the gift that you presented to us, we'll take back to El Paso and put in a place of pride. Thank you for being here and for your leadership on these issues as well.
Thank you.
Chuck, thanks for hosting us. And as we walked in, tell me a little bit about what you and your team does for and with the community. That was really powerful too. And so much of this campaign for me has been listening to and learning the stories of those that I want to serve. And those stories comprising the reasons for the campaign, the way in which we campaign, and also the way that this country comes together at a very divided and a very polarized moment to do the really big things that not only are we not doing in this administration, but we have not been able to overcome in previous administrations of both parties as well. It won't be done through half measures. It won't be done by half steps. It cannot be done by half the country. It's got to be everyone. And the only way I know to bring everyone in is to literally go and listen to everyone and bring their stories in and reflect that back in the campaign. My name is Beto O'Rourke, born and raised in El Paso, Texas. For those of you not from or who have not been to El Paso, it's the westernmost county in the state of Texas, the only one in the Mountain Time Zone, connected to Ciudad Juarez, forming the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere, joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River, an exceptionally beautiful place in the heart of the Chihuahuan Desert and at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. I remember as a child growing up with the Asarco copper smelter dominating the skyline of El Paso, and on days like this one where it was really hot, not literally being able to breathe and not being able to go outside. My dad, who had asthma, just racked by it all day and in bed, unable to go to work or to leave the house either. I also remember our community coming together to oppose Asarco's ability to continue operation in our community and bringing forth the facts, the rates of MS around the copper smelter, the fact that we are a minority-majority community, 85% of my fellow El Pasoans, Mexican Americans, connected to Ciudad Juarez, relative to the United States, an incredibly poor and impoverished part of the world. And yet these were the communities that were bearing the brunt, not just of the pollution and the toxins, but the MS and the cancers that were disproportionately found where we live. The community organized around making sure that Asarco could not receive a permit to continue to operate. Unfortunately, despite the facts and the community's interest, the State Environmental Organization, TCEQ, granted them a permit. But thanks to President Obama and the EPA administration under his watch, they intervened and backed the community and stopped Asarco from continuing to emit those pollutions and protected the public health of the community. So I tell you that example to say that in my own hometown, we saw what happened when a community came together and when the action of the community was met by the action of a president who understood that that local interest was paramount to protecting the public health. I also understand right now that when we talk about climate change very often, it is an abstraction for most people in America. They don't understand how it impacts their day-to-day life. What I'm looking for here at this table today are those stories about your day-to-day lives and the people with whom you work, so I can tell them to other Americans in other parts of the country and bring all these stories together in the larger story that will compel us to act with the urgency that this moment demands. We were just recently in Iowa, where we saw the greatest flooding along the Missouri River, the greatest flooding along the Mississippi River in the history of those two rivers in Iowa. Towns that had never flooded before, completely underwater, every homeowner losing everything of value that they had possessed before. They get that climate change is happening right now. Those farmers, the fertilizers they put in their fields end up right here in your community. Iowa connected to New Orleans by the Mississippi River. The dead zone, I heard a lot of people talk about their work on the Gulf. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico connected to actions that we take in states and communities that are half a country away right now. I want to make sure that we bring everybody into that. And lastly, I want to acknowledge that beyond confronting climate change, there's also a demand for climate justice. Understanding the communities that are disproportionately impacted by the climate change and the pollution that we are seeing right now must be at the front of the line for federal investment and action going forward. That's why in our plan, we propose that we invest in the resiliency of New Orleans, the resiliency of Houston, Texas, that saw 58 inches of rain, which is the landfall record from a single storm and the third 500-year flood in just the last 5 years. Resiliency for Pacific Junction, Iowa, that town that was now underwater, because we know that these disasters, not caused by God or by Mother Nature, but by all of us, are going to continue to happen more frequently, more devastatingly, and at a greater cost of life and property unless we intervene in a meaningful way right now. But in order to bring our fellow Americans together, we must understand these stories, know what is happening, be inspired by the leadership that you're providing, and that's why I'm here today, to listen, to learn, to apply what we hear to what we want to do for this country by bringing everybody in. So thank you all for doing this, and Chuck and Nick, you'll help facilitate the conversation so we bring as many people in. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
A free-flowing dialogue and discussion, but we wanted to just kick off the conversation with a couple stories from a few folks here. So we'll start with Chuck, and then Angela, and then Logan, and then Chief Capel or somebody from the Homeland Nation. I think it would also be important to hear your perspective as well. And then from there, we'll open it up to a broader discussion. So we have about an hour, so I think hopefully we'll get, it'll be a very robust discussion at that time. So go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, just, one of the things that stands out to me, Beto, is that we do a lot of work in stormwater management. We train small businesses to be part of that economy. One of the things that we really focus on is how do we prepare minority-owned small businesses to take advantage of these environmental opportunities. But stormwater management is a huge, huge issue for us in our city, as you may already know. If it rains hard, it floods. As a being a reverend in a church, sometimes on Sundays, many of our members can't make the church because of the rain, and they're flooded out and they can't make it out. So one of the things that we really address here is climate change, but also as it relates to flooding and stormwater management and our infrastructure in our city being able to help manage that water. And we're trying to be good stewards. We're trying to figure out green infrastructure. But right now it's a crisis for us as we think about it. I almost missed my daughter's high school graduation because of the rain a couple of years ago in May. And that shouldn't be. So it shouldn't be like that in our city. So that's my story, and we're trying to figure out how to mitigate that. And many of the partners around the table are working together on that issue.
Let me ask you a quick question on something you said. We know that one of the best predictors of your exposure to toxins, to pollution, to the consequences of climate change is your race and your income. And so beyond investing in the resiliency of these communities, so that whether you're in New Orleans or we hear the same in Charleston or Houston, every time it rains, it floods, that you're able to get to that graduation or to your doctor's visit or to work. You mentioned small businesses. How do we ensure those communities that have been disproportionately impacted negatively are front in the line economically? Small business owners providing the stormwater management solutions, the engineering solutions, the green technology solutions going forward. What have you seen in New Orleans that could inform what we want to do nationally?
Well, here's what I see. First and foremost, you got to be intentional. And Dana's going to smile at me because this is my mantra. You have to be intentional about what you do. You have to have a plan. You have to reach out to those communities. Angela says it a lot of times also, you got to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
You can't expect you to have a community meeting somewhere that they don't go to, that are comfortable at. You have to go to the people. One of the things that we're doing is we intentionally reach out to African American churches. So 90% of the people that come to our program are people of color. So not only are they learning and getting involved in this economy, they're also going back and being ambassadors for their communities. So we we think that for success to happen, we gotta meet people where they are, we gotta be intentional, we gotta be relational, we gotta go to people, we gotta meet them where they are, we gotta have conversations with them. And I think for people that are probably not people of color, also you gotta talk to people that you don't look like you, and maybe they don't have the same social economic background that you have. I think you gotta be actionable. You gotta do what you say you're gonna do. If you say you're gonna have this thing, you say you're gonna bring this resource to the table, bring the resource to the table. And last but not least, if we do those things, then we're gonna be inspirational. We're gonna inspire people to tell stories and be part of this thing. And that's something that I think people are, around the table have heard this bill before, but this is what it's all about. I mean, we have to do that to make sure that we leave no one behind.
I like that. Yeah, does anyone want to add to?
Conversely, I guess on the other side, I was having this discussion with someone earlier. From the supposed jobs that we're training for, that we're getting them, there needs to be some type of bridge or connection. What we're seeing is, we've got a bunch of folks walking around with certificates, and nobody's got jobs. And it happened after Katrina. There's a boatload of funds coming into the utility, about $350 million to do resilience projects, and we've been told that there will be jobs, green infrastructure jobs for people hit the ground running. Some type of mechanism that connects the two, so we can take that young person or that community member with that certificate, walk them into that job, not another orientation, not a set of meetings, but walk them to that job.
What's the disconnect between the education, the training, the resulting certification, and the job? Why is that not?
In my opinion, what I've seen happen here is it boils down to money, where a large contractor will get the job and money and enforcement. So a large contractor will get the job, and they'll be told that as part of this job, you have to hire X amount of community members, X amount of folks from, and if you don't, you will be penalized. Well, one, the penalties aren't great enough, and two, there is no enforcement.
I'll say to that, though, I will have to say that our Launch NOLA Green Academy, we have a partnership with Aptim, and we are going to be the installers of those stormwater management tools in utility. So we have 40 yards that we're starting off with probably next week. So we went to Aptim, and you are the prime contractor. You really need to be a good social steward, a good community partner, and they have allowed our graduates to install our businesses to be a partner with theirs. And it's hard, you're right, it's hard, but we have to figure out how to crack that nut if we want to figure out how to get people. You're right, having a certificate and opportunity is nothing. You can't get them, you're ready, you're trained, but you can't get them to fill and play. That means nothing.
Yeah. Great point. Go ahead now.
I mean, it's also about the size of the business too, right? If you're a bigger contractor and you have cash flow in the bank to be able to staff up in time for a larger project, you can take advantage of those bigger public opportunities. But if there's not enough smaller private market jobs to fill in the gap between getting paid by the city and waiting that out, then you're not gonna be able to compete for those bigger jobs. And so part of—
You can go broke in the process.
You can go broke. So part of the issue—
Getting the job, you could go broke.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have to wait, 6 months for the work to start, and then you wait another 3 months to submit an invoice, and then another 3 months to get paid, then you can't afford to take on a job like that. And so part of it is getting enough smaller dollar jobs to the point so that a company can grow to the point where they can feel, that they have a banking relationship to be able to take on work like that. But getting to that point is really difficult.
So capital, cash flow to make it work, bonding capacity. I heard somebody say that. I know that was a challenge in El Paso. Small businesses who had the expertise did not have the bonding capacity to compete with the primes. And to your point, the primes had a goal of this many small businesses they work with, but it wasn't enforced and it wasn't a mandate.
Well,
so they'd say we made a good faith effort to bring it in.
There's subcontractor and then there's hiring, right?
Yeah.
There's Section 3 and then there's subcontracting. And so those are usually different goals depending on the source of the federal funds that's funding the project. So if you're working on a transit project, you're gonna have a lot stricter goals than you are if the funding source is coming from somewhere else. So for some communities, it's about making sure that if you're using general revenue, that the requirements for subcontracting procurement are as strict as they would be for federal funds.
And related to that is just scale. I mean, water management is an opportunity because a lot of really small scale projects need to happen as well as the big scale. So to your point, a smaller contractor is more aligned with a smaller scale job. Government tends to think big and sometimes it needs to think through as well.
Yeah.
Isabel, why don't you go ahead and then we'll let you.
This is a little bit of a reach, but I was thinking in terms of the whole idea of more resiliency, that a lot of people were displaced from Gentilly, that's where I live, so the flooding from Katrina made it really hard to come back home for a lot of folks. Now that the district is going to become more resilient, and I used to work in real estate, so it's like, it becomes very attractive to people who want to pay less flood insurance, who want to be sure that their house won't flood. How are we going to make sure that the people who live in Gentilly can stay there and have access to those jobs and really understand the full scope of this resilience work that's happening, because we are already being gentrified.
Let me ask you about this. So in Kashmere Gardens, one of these neighborhoods in Houston, it's flooded 3 times over the last 5 years. We were driving through the neighborhood a year after Harvey. So this was summer of 2018. And literally on every other light post was a yellow sign tacked up saying, "Sell your homes for cash." And people who had built equity over the course of a lifetime, literally built those homes, were selling them for pennies on the dollar because they had to rebuild the home 3 times, no longer had any resources to keep it, and were losing their entire investment. And you're seeing a huge gentrification push just after one storm, similar after Katrina and Rita or other storms along the way here. And if so, how did the community meet that challenge of gentrification?
Well, we're not.
We failed spectacular.
Yeah.
Now, half the people who live in the city of New Orleans right now today are cost burdened. So they can't afford to live here. So we failed spectacularly. We built 88,000 or created 88,000 subsidized housing opportunities 10 years after Katrina. And we are now experiencing what will probably go down as the worst affordability crisis in the city's history. $9 billion of public money, hundreds of millions of dollars of philanthropic money, hundreds of thousands of hours contributed by Americans who came down to help pull the city out of the drink. And this is where we are because we didn't do the hard work up front, like Isabel's talking about, and we didn't destigmatize the concept of affordable housing. We didn't talk about the racialized aspect. We all assumed that the money was sent for the folks in the lower 9th Ward and the people who make this city great, and the money did not get spent to actually preserve the lifestyle or the opportunities for those people.
The program was designed so that it gave people the pre-storm value of their house rather than the replacement value.
Well, that's just the Road Home program. I mean, we're a city of minority homeowners. Most of the money went to homeowners. We're a city of majority renters. There was very little direct assistance to renters. So we started without dealing with the racial inequities. We started without saying, hey, there's a reason the majority of the people who live in the city, who are majority African American, have not managed to take advantage of the dream of homeownership in a city where 60% of the housing stock before the storm, the homes for sale, were worth $100,000 or less. And the people of this city still couldn't buy. We still couldn't be a majority homeowner community, but the money that came was targeted for homeowners. We started, and again, we want to build wealth, we want to create new homeowners, but we didn't invest in that. And so that's why what Isabel's talking about is all good intentions, forward thinking.
Lots of money.
Lots of money, but we don't deal with the totality of the issues. And everybody knew. I mean, again, what people in this country responded to was those underlying inequities. What people saw on television, those inequities on full display. That is what the people of this country said that they wanted to end. And we took the resources and then we didn't talk about it.
Right.
What would you have done differently in terms of, you mentioned just one dynamic of it, the number of renters who were not going to get either original home value or replacement value, they were going to get anything. Would you have included a program that would have helped those renters build equity through home ownership as a response to the rebuilding?
Yes.
Ms. Catherine, number one, we got to listen to the residents. Ms. Catherine.
I think that would have been one of the priorities, especially for a lot of the renters that are living inside of our community, especially in the upper 9th Ward. We had a whole lot of renters inside of our community that maybe their rent was maybe no more than $135, $200. Now their rent is up to $1,500, and the housing hasn't changed any at all. The house itself still looks unemployable in certain areas. And they have to find a place to live, so they fit in how they have to live. They have to do that. If it costs them $750 and it's raggedy, that's what it's gonna be. But it should have been in place where they could have put that $750 to owning the property. But that's not what they did. And especially in the upper ninth ward, now we're starting to see more gentrification. We're getting to see more of it, even more so now. And like I told them after Katrina, they're gonna come back. These people here that moved to St. Bernard are gonna come back. You was the renter. They're gonna come back, kick you out, and now they're gonna be a homeowner. And that's what we're seeing now inside of our community. There's nothing left on the Bywater side to buy. So now they're moving in on our side and sticking up little things saying, we wanna buy your property. But what I tell my residents is, if it's not $500,000, don't do it. If it's not $500,000, don't do it, because if you sell your house, you're not gonna have nothing to live in. Property is went up so high over here.
I would say Ms. Catherine, she's 100% right. But one of the things I want to share with you is that I believe we're killing the song. And what I mean by that is that, you know, people come here for our culture, our music, and all the great things we offer. But if they don't have a place to live, the things that you moved here for, you're displacing those folks. And the song you came to hear is dying because we're killing the song. Because the birds have nowhere to live. So we have to find a better way of preserving our culture, but not pushing it out further and further and killing the song.
And with that, the most ludicrous thing that I heard from someone who was a replant to New Orleans is that they didn't want the neighbors sitting on their front porch.
Right.
That was the most. And if you don't know, sitting on our front porch is cultural, it's community, it's communication, it's connection with the community, it's waiting for the second line to pass by in front of your house. You know, some of us buy houses because we know that's the route for the second line. And for someone to live outside of the community, to come here, to actually petition the city council to forbid me or anybody to sit on my front porch is crazy. First of all, it's my home, and then you're gonna tell me I can't sit on my front porch. Those are the types of things that we've had to endure in our city.
And you know, part of the, like, what we're hearing is this, we're not nationally able to get much traction on environmental change as a national issue. And part of that is because the justice part is left behind. We're not recognizing that when we talk, we tend to like slip into this language of like the climate change is our greatest existential threat ever, and just assume that we're all on the same page without realizing that for many people of color that have lived in this country, the last 300 years have been an existential threat. This is not the first, and this is not necessarily even the worst, and the only way we can actually talk about it in any meaningful way is if we link it to the justice piece of it and the social justice piece of it. And without that, it's nothing, because when we talk about pushing for funding for our infrastructure to address this stormwater management, well, we can say yes if we don't have that, our water situation fixed, we're going to drown, but every day people are drowning under this cost burden. And if we're not recognizing that, we're not going to get anywhere, locally or nationally, on this discussion of what climate change really is about.
Great point.
If I can jump in, I think even outside of just the city and in general of what happens, the way the system is set up is very broken. It assumes that people only flood once. And so as we've been on this climate change roller coaster, is communities flood repetitively. And so for anybody, regardless of what resources you may have, lots of people will make the assumption that after you've flooded and whether you have insurance or you've gone through the FEMA process, you're whole and you're back to where you were, and that's not a reality.
Right.
Is even for those folks that can't afford insurance, is they're only gonna get you maybe like 80%. And unless you have the resources to pump the additional money to get your home back to where it needs to be,
then you're stuck at that 80%. So then you have another reoccurring event that takes place, and you're at that, still at that 80%, and then you start getting into debates of, well, was this previous damage or is this new damage? So then that's the whole frustration for individuals going through there, and then they might get you to 60%. So it becomes decisions for communities that are dealing with that repetitive flooding of, at what point do I have to cut bait? And then the unfortunate thing is as, and most of the time, those communities that are going to be in those repetitive flooding situations because they don't get as much attention for infrastructure, is that those are minority poor communities. So then the individuals that are then at the point of making decisions become very paternalistic of, we know what's best for you, and it's just not safe for you to live there anymore, instead of us dealing with the real issues on the front end. And so, like, we saw this post-Katrina is you had a large number of people that elevated their homes, you know, and whatnot. Well, we had Gustav and Rita that came by 3 years later, and all of a sudden your roof is off because nobody paid after you elevated to say, we're gonna strengthen your, you know, so it's the system really never addresses the issue. And really trying to fix the problem first before it becomes so exacerbated that folks are in really desperate situations.
So if we could morph to Angela and let Angela start her.
I was thinking about that as well. So that's where Health and Community Services comes in at, and we educate, engage, educate, and empower people to make those decisions around not only stormwater management, but coastal issues as well, and to address food insecurities, because when you have an event, well, even if it's just it's not even a minor flood event, because every time it floods here, it's a major event. You know, how do you address those issues of getting to and from work, getting your kids to and from school? And so what Health and Community Service has done, along with Waterwise, Gulf South, and the other community organizations that partner under that collaboration, Bunny Front, Upper Ninth Ward, Greater Tremaine Consortium, and Recharge Nova, they told me I had to mention this, is to have a community-driven action plan, and that I'll present you with this. And so by the end of the fall, we will have, well, right now, we're collecting close to 20,000 gallons of stormwater that never gets into the storm drain system. And so we're teaching people about green infrastructure in the way that we're using native plants with our hydrology. And so we work with Groundworks NOLA with that workforce. We work with the Urban Conservancy with concrete removal, because that is a fact. We work with Project NOLA to plant trees, because we know that the leaves, no matter what size the tree is, 40% of that water is collected with those trees. The other aspect of it is with the Foundation for Louisiana. So we're connecting the urban area to the coast. And this summer we had 15 participants, and 70% of those participants were youth. So they understand now the value of the Mississippi River, because we take the Mississippi River for granted. And we're connected. We call it collective connectedness from as far west as the Rockies, far east as the Appalachians. And so now we understand, beginning to teach people to understand what green infrastructure is, because until it happens to you, it is abstract. But when you have 6 feet of water in your house, you know, you may not be thinking about it until it's acute. So through our programming, we're helping people to get a jump on that, to understand it. And when you hear the person at the barbershop talking about, you know, a French drain, or you all know Bullets, when you hear Bullet talking about capturing water off of his roof into a planter box, that begins to have impact. And through our neighborhood champions, they start the conversation, and now they're starting the conversation about stormwater management. The other part of that goes back to workforce development. We, Dana Brown and Associates just held the National Green Infrastructure Professional Testing. And so now you have right at about 40 people in this city that are certified to be green infrastructure professionals to understand how to construct, install, maintain, and inspect green infrastructure, because that work is gonna come on the back end to get people included in this. And actually, one of the participants, just recently got a job with a firm here. So when you bring that community person to, an engineering firm, and I like to say, I live in my community. You all have heard the story. I live in the house my grandfather won in a car game in 1942. So I'm not going anywhere. I have to, make sure that I'm true to my community and leaving tangible assets. And that's what we're doing. We're leaving tangible assets, and we're empowering people to make those decisions. And I just want to say thank you to the philanthropic organizations who fund our work, because we don't get government funding. And it's just that I talk a lot and have a big mouth that people pay attention to me. And we're moving the needle, and that's fine. We're moving the needle from the community level up.
I love how you also in part answered Todd's concern about certification without jobs, and you mentioned the certification on green infrastructure. It's connected to work that's happening, and I'm seeing, I think, some examples of that in this plan here. And also connecting people inland to the coast. In El Paso, we had the worst flood, and we're in the desert, in 2006, and it just wiped out entire neighborhoods and homes. And some people live on the mountain, and some people live near the river. And what we're able to connect is that when the rain hits that mountain, it's gonna come off real fast, and it's gonna hit you as it tries to make its way to the river. And as we put more concrete and asphalt and drainage ditches, we just accelerate the speed of that water. So we began to invest public dollars in just keeping land in its natural state, and did so for the stormwater purpose. Also, you can hike in it now, you can enjoy it, not everything is developed, but we had to make the connection that everyone was going to depend on that land being preserved, maybe much in the same way you're talking about planting this land here. So anyhow, I love that.
Yeah, so I would just ask that, whoever the president is, that you can address community issues, and I have this driven from the community. And I'm sorry, Julia, I forgot, we're also working on a research project. I know you're looking over me like, when I looked over yet. We're working on a research project for residents to understand the urban heat island effect by planting more trees to reduce that carbon and that heat in the social community. Because what we know in that, and when you live in communities that are hot, you have higher crime. And think about it, as you drive around, if you're just sitting at the red light and there's no tree, how hot that is. So naturally, you will have people who become more violent. Studies have shown that neighborhoods with trees, residents have less health-related issues such as asthma. And so beginning to plant those trees and getting to understand, residents to understand the importance of the tree, not only from the health benefits, but also the uptake of the water. And so Julie and I work on that project. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah, I forgot about that. You all tell me I'm doing so much, so I don't realize until I go back and I'm doing the reports, and I'm like, oh wow, we did all of that.
But it is important to bring up, I mean, just around the corner, there were 3 people waiting for the health clinic to open. And we are in an ozone warning day.
Yes.
Heat kills more people than any natural disaster combined.
Today's an ozone warning day?
Yesterday. So, yesterday. In the middle of Essence Fest. So,
and we have the Saharan dust that's settling.
Right. So when we talk about a lot of these issues, they're all intrinsically related. So concrete is, the source of our flooding issues as well as our heat issues. And some of the solutions are very much the same. Community sourced connection to where the problems are is essential, because even if you have all of the resources flowing in the direction of solving the problem, when you actually start to work on infrastructure projects like we have at IC Change, we realize that the model data and the information that we're using is not accurate enough or specific enough. And so a lot of the assumptions that our cities or our engineers and our infrastructure designers are making, even if they have the best intentions and want the best results, the information that they're using isn't accurate enough unless you bring the community involved and involve them about their stories, mobilize them. We don't actually give power at IC Change. People like Angela already have natural power. So you channel that natural power alongside technology to actually create community-sourced solutions, We have projects all around the country and the world, but I'm based here in New Orleans. We are first and foremost always on the front line, so whatever is happening here, you pay attention to New Orleans, you will get a forecast of how it's going to go down in Miami, how it's going to go down in North Carolina, because they're making a lot of the same mistakes that we already have. So whether it's heat or flooding or air quality, paying attention to daily stories, the community members are saying, hey, it floods over here first, put the project over there, put the trees over here. And actually, we've, using community source data, proven that we're doing heat advisories all wrong. Indoor heat, when you are living in an apartment building without AC, or in Alaska where nobody has an AC and it's 90 degrees today, you're going to experience the heat in a different way than the National Weather Service tells you. On Memorial Day weekend, we had people in the hospital for heat stroke, and we also had 17 murders that weekend. The National Weather Service only can send out alerts. They're really not paying attention to block by block heat impacts, block by block flooding impacts. So that's where a lot of the stories and data are coming together. But I have to ask, and if it's okay to ask you.
Of course, yeah.
You know, a lot of the stories that we're hearing, or the time that is being allotted around climate change is kind of siloing it, and really not giving it the attention it deserves with regards to the impacts on immigration, our economy, our health. It is the biggest thing to solve that can actually lift all boats. And we didn't hear that in the comments, and we didn't hear that enough. And I appreciate you came out as one of the first with a climate change action plan. But I'd love to hear more of your positions on, and again, we're a Louisiana state, we're all very much related to this ring. It's like hanging out with your neighbors all the time.
Yeah.
The good, the bad, and the ugly, and we love everybody. We all know each other's business. In Louisiana, we're a petrochemical state, and so is Texas.
Right.
And you received a lot of campaign donations for your Senate race from the petrochemical companies. And if we're really going to be serious about net zero by 2050, I'd love to hear more about your positions on energy, and I'd love to talk for Logan to be able to speak about our experience with natural gas plants.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. Agree with everything that you said, and you could add our foreign policy and the wars that we fight. The civil war in Syria was precipitated by the greatest drought that that country had ever seen. And we know that that drought was not caused by God, but was caused by all of us. And I don't know where the US is, 1/3 to 1/4 of all the excess carbon that's been emitted right here in this country. We're connected to challenges in war and peace, challenges in immigration. Guatemalans who are coming to the United States of America are not just fleeing one of the deadliest countries on the face of the planet, but one of the driest places in the Western Hemisphere right now, cannot grow their own food, and are doing what any human being would do, forced with the same conditions. They're coming here as they should. And
Why aren't we hearing about that? Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, and drought cycle. Why aren't we talking about that on this stage?
That's right, and I'm talking about it right now. And when asked what is the single greatest geopolitical challenge the United States faces at the debate, I said climate change, because it underlies every other challenge that we face, foreign and domestic. I'll briefly address your concern, and then briefly address our plan. You mentioned that we received a lot of contributions, not from petrochemical companies, because I don't take any PAC money or corporate money or special interest money, but from employees of petrochemical companies. You also acknowledge that Texas is a large petrochemical state. I received more campaign contributions than any candidate who's ever run for the United States Senate. A lot of those came from workers in those industries, but a lot of them came from workers in other industries. We were the top, the second, or the third largest recipient of campaign contributions from employees in any given number of industries, to include that one. But to allay any concerns about whether my allegiance is to oil and gas companies or to people, I also have taken the fossil fuel pledge in this campaign. So we're not receiving any contributions from those executives at those companies either. And I hope that allows us then to work on the solution, which is to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2050, get there sooner if we can, get halfway there by 2030, and then under executive action, be able to stop a lot of our contributions to climate change on day one of our administration. So no offshore drilling, no drilling on federal public lands, any existing leases rewritten to reflect the true cost of climate and pollution to our communities. We talked about concrete. The federal government invests billions, it could be trillions over the next 8 years in infrastructure. Let's make sure that we source that in an environmentally friendly way, and that includes the steel and the concrete that we buy, the building materials that we use. Let's have the EPA use its rule writing authority to set absolute caps on emissions, not just from the transportation industry, not just from the energy industry, but from construction, from agriculture, from every dynamic of American life. The way somebody put it, the seconds on the shot clock are counting down. We do not have time to experiment. We need absolute limits set every single year. And then this country has to convene the other powers of the planet to make sure that they do their part. And we have to lead by example. We all know that Paris was a great first step, was totally insufficient to the goals that we need to reach. It has to be far more ambitious, aspirational, and there's got to be a much greater example set here as the world's largest economy if we expect anyone else to follow our lead. So a little bit about, you know, the gravity and the scope of the problem. Your excellent point earlier that it affects every aspect of life, whether we call it climate change or not. It is happening to people, and it is happening to people disproportionately who have borne the majority of the struggles in the last 400 years of this country. All of that needs to be on the table, but then we have to be really big and bring everybody in. And again, part of why I'm listening to stories today, to share them with folks in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and back in Texas too.
Beto, could I just wanted to, I want to thank you for uplifting race as the primary indicator for the location of toxic facilities. And if you Google that phrase, Beto is the first person that comes up. So I want to highlight that because too often we see a disconnect between campaigning and governance. And so I would ask that if you are elected president, that you use that pulpit to continue to uplift those issues. You know, as a young black male in the lower 9, a lot of the students that I work with, they see a lack of vision in government planning. And far too often I get the question, I'm happy if our elected officials care about us, where is the vision for the future? And so why aren't we looking at education for long-term planning and how we connect youth to these jobs? And so as I listened to how you responded to the climate question in the New York Times interview, I was really inspired when you talked about marshaling federal resources and using that to send a signal to countries around the world, but also here in the US. And so in Louisiana, we have this comprehensive coastal master plan, and it's a 50-year, $50 billion project that will look at large-scale restoration of our marshes and bayous. And our organization has tried to uplift this idea and concept of equity and long-term planning. And how do we think about a job that will take place 10 years from now and educate a 14-year-old so that they are prepared to fulfill the procurement for that job? Because there is a connection between unemployment and crime. And in New Orleans, more than 50% of black males are unemployed. And the way that we can signal to black men that they are of value is that if we use the resources to in an intentional way to engage and increase that level of participation. So that's what I wanted to lift.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And you look at the 2 fastest growing jobs in America today, and they're wind jobs and they're solar jobs. High value, high wage, high skill. It's back to the conversation with Todd and Angela about certification and connecting what you learn, the trade that you have acquired, the skills that you were taught, and then actually being in that job. There's got to be a more powerful and effective role for the federal government in guaranteeing that connection, especially when we look at this through the perspective of justice. And the communities that have bore the brunt of climate change so far should be first in line to reap the rewards of the benefits of a transitioning economy that's going to leave a dependence on fossil fuels for the next generation of wind and solar. And not just the technical and operative jobs, but also the engineering, the innovation, the creative jobs that are connected to that.
one country, and it's going to be China or the United States, is going to figure out the next generation of these technologies. I want it to be us, and I want that opportunity to be extended to everyone, and especially to those who have been denied it in the past. And so I agree with you. I think the challenge is going to be in the details of how that is implemented. But the investment in the skills, the education, the elevation of unions that can provide much of that through apprenticeships. And this is just one idea. We learned this by listening to people at a roundtable in Nevada. They said, you know, your climate change plan calls for a $5 trillion mobilization of capital over the next 10 years. Much of that will be in infrastructure. What if some significant percentage of those jobs were required to be union jobs, and some significant percentage of those union jobs were first-year apprenticeships, which make the connection with those who may have had some of the initial interest and skills and training but do not have the job. That would guarantee them the placement. That's a really exciting idea to me that might be able to actualize, as you said, the idea, you know, be able to walk that talk.
But I also I agree with everything that you just said. It's wonderful, it's great. One of the things that always happens with the federal government and just government in general is you have great intentions, legislation comes out, but then it doesn't line up to what's really going on the ground. One of the biggest issues we have around training and certifications is that level is up here and our folk are here. And there's no connection and no pipeline for them to get there. And so I know for a fact that federal money will eventually come into workforce in this sector. What I want to be intentional about mentioning here, because we have the opportunity to, is really to make sure that there's an entryway for people who may not have the skill sets to do the basic trainings that exist right now, that have a way to get those skills to ultimately get those certifications. We've got a gigantic disconnect around workforce. We require all kinds of things that are totally unnecessary to the skills that are actually needed to do the job. And this is an opportunity to really kind of bridge that gap and do it in an intentional way with funds and with urgency because it involves climate.
Tell me what the solution to that is, and I'll give you just one example, and then tell me if this is in line. We were in eastern New Mexico in a town called Tucumcari. They have a community college called Mesa Lands, and essentially 100% of their focus is on wind energy, wind turbines, the engineering, mechanical, and maintenance work around that. You finished that program and you are earning $70,000 plus out the door, 2 years, essentially an associate's degree. Are you saying that there are too many people right now who do not have the necessary skills to get to that first year at Mesa Lands? Or that there are not enough Mesa? So it's even just bridging the skills gap between where you left your education and where you would start at Mesa Lands?
It's both. So you need to have lots of opportunities for the Mesa Lands to exist, but you also need to have a bridge for the people that can't get to Mesa Lands right now.
Gotcha.
If you provide both,
yeah.
I just want to do a quick time check. We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to get Logan in to say a few words, and then we can continue.
Just quickly say that when we're talking workforce, let's not forget small business opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we always, that's our sole focus.
Yeah, that's right, but it's just, I'm sorry. Just remember, they have to take this apprenticeship test to even become an apprentice. And a lot of them can't pass the test. So that's where the disconnect is. They want to become this person that's in already as an apprentice, but they can't pass the test. So that's where the disconnect is.
And the cost of testing.
Yeah, and the cost of testing.
And can I just, before we get to Logan, just say, to kind of answer the question Ms. Kathy's gonna do, we're gonna do another reverse handoff, right? One of the big answers is data, right? Everybody has great ideas. All of this stuff has to be contextualized with the facts and through the community lens. That's incredibly important.
Right.
We don't do enough of that, right? Yep. We have disconnected facts. We have what community thinks, what community feels, what experts think, what they feel, and we've got to do a better job connecting that. That grounds the strategy. So when we talk about what everybody, we're happy with James and everybody's talking about, when you talk about the unemployment rate of black males in the city of New Orleans, that is a failure of the market. What ends up happening is it becomes an indictment on black men. right? That it leads into every stereotype there is out there, but the unemployment rate, if you know how it's calculated, is not about the fact that these black men don't want to work. It is a failure of the market to hire them. But we don't think like that. We don't talk like that. And again, that's because we're not taking the data, contextualizing it, and then using it to design strategies, and then going back again and evaluating all of that for impact, effectiveness. I mean, everybody likes to dance when we pass a policy, and no one likes to come back and check and see if that policy actually works. And then if it didn't, acknowledging that, and then doing the hard work to change it. Accountability has got to be the name of the game.
Yes. Can I just add real quick that it's not that there's a lack of work to do either.
That's right.
Like this, and it's not just energy production; it's energy efficiency. Like we need to retrofit
Every house
in the world. We need to replace every sewer pipe, every water pipe. Like, and it's not just here; it's all over. Flint still hasn't been fixed. Like there are water lines, sewer lines. There's trillions of dollars of work to do. We have to wait.
Flint, Gordon Plaza. We don't leave New Orleans for our own.
There's so much work to do. And Congressman, I mean, Houston is about to spend $7 billion widening some roads. We didn't vote on that. Can we have that money?
I also think you can have some money.
I think the roads are wide enough.
Before you get that money, you want to go to Logan. If Liz has something to say first.
Just to add on this before we change it, if you don't mind, Logan. I just want to be explicit, like, in terms of retrofitting houses that already exist, those are funds that aren't allocated. But in Louisiana, with green infrastructure and coastal restoration dollars, as well as water management dollars, we already have $500 million a year for the next 14 years that could be spent to create an inclusive green economy here now. We're not actually waiting on a Green New Deal set of legislative items in Louisiana. We have a $1.2 billion federal allocation for water management across the state because in 5 years, within the last 10 years, every single parish in the state of Louisiana has been under a federal flood declaration. This is not just a coastal problem here, right? And yet we're not actually taking the steps, both at all of the layers of connecting the tissue. We don't have state agencies that are making decisions that ensure that local people get jobs. We certainly don't, in the state of Louisiana, have a justice-centered set of state agencies that are working to make sure that we're breaking down systems level racialized inequities. That's just the jobs piece. And there is a reality that we're already in Louisiana seeing rippling effects across our sectors, and it's not a future scenario. After Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Isaac, the BP oil spill, we have seen people with resources be able to pick up and move from areas that are most flood prone. We see poverty rates increase proportionally. We see a decline in availability to provide social services or to provide resources to actually reduce the risk for climate. And then on the reverse of that, we see people moving because they have to go somewhere to areas that are perceived as lower risk, even though they may not be. We see schools over capacity, traffic swelling, and then we see housing being developed willy-nilly, slab on grade. You want to slab on grade? Come on in, right? And then we're just going to give no place for the water to go. And so those areas that people are moving to are actually the areas that are now flooding because of heavy rainfall events where we haven't designed the infrastructure to accommodate that growth. And there are realities that stretch into housing, that stretch into public health, transit, economic development. Like this is so real here. It is not a future scenario in any way. And we are necessarily leading the nation on how to actually address adaptation, but at the very reality, we are not addressing the culture of reliance on petrochemical and extractive industries that are simultaneously the hand that feeds us in many ways, because so many of Louisianans are employed by those industries. So we don't want to actually bite that hand. And I want to kick it to Logan. That's where we go.
There's a lot of years. What I keep thinking about is we're talking, so many people at this table are brilliant at working on the adaptation issue. What absolutely must be dealt with in Louisiana and in other energy states is what this identity of an energy state is. What this story that we've been told all our lives and that we continue to tell ourselves about what we are and what we can be. And what that has been is extractive of people, of the people who have built the culture that you want to come here sing, right? Now, what we absolutely are missing out in Louisiana on is the opportunity to move in the way that Texas has done in wind, because there hasn't been that investment in those clean energy alternatives. There hasn't been an investment in our housing stock because, and as a result, we use 30% more electricity per household. So when it's hot out, you crank the AC because it's humid and it's hot and you can't sleep, and then you have reduced productivity, you have increased negative health outcomes, and it's this vicious cycle that we keep digging ourselves into. And the problem is not just in Louisiana and not just in Texas, it's now even expanding into other places where the natural gas boom is now creating then further petrochemical issues, right? So now we're getting ethylene crackers in places like Pennsylvania, not just here. And we're seeing that's expanding and not contracting, and we desperately need to contract that to see a different kind of an energy future, a different kind of an energy identity to protect ourselves. And what I know is that in New Orleans, we're surrounded by this petrochemical industry, and yet people are, and we're told we have really low energy rates, but people are afraid to open their electricity bill at the end of the month because they know they can't pay for it. They know that adds to their housing costs, and it doesn't matter even if you still have affordable housing if you can't pay a $500 electricity bill at the end of August. And so what this means is that instability in terms of health, in terms of the economy, in terms of our opportunities to stay here for the long term. And what concerns me is that so far, because we keep telling ourselves, or we keep being told this story that this is all we can be, even our elected officials in New Orleans are ignoring thousands of people who will show up to public meetings and say, I don't want a new gas plant in my neighborhood a mile from my house. And our elected officials are saying, no, we're going to do that anyway, because it's Louisiana and because gas is clean and gas is good for us.
Gas is king.
That's right. And so instead, what the community has turned around and said is, okay, we not only don't want a new gas plant in our neighborhood because we can't afford it, all the ways that we can't afford it in terms of our health and our bills, we want community solar. That means we want to own and build community wealth in these new clean energy opportunities. We want a renewable portfolio standard. We want, and not just a renewable portfolio standard saying we want to hit 100% renewables by 2040, but we want to do it in a way that encourages engagement with the jobs that people don't have, right? So let's build those education pipelines. Let's make sure that once people are trained, let's make sure they have a job connected to it. Let's make sure that people can pay those electricity bills and acknowledge the real costs of the energy systems that we have right now. And that might even be, let's pay attention to what we're paying in terms of our nuclear assets, which are, although they're low carbon, they're really expensive in this country, and they are actually contributing to the inequities in places like Louisiana and in Georgia, I know you know. So what I think a lot of people are saying is, we need not just for our state to say, we're gonna move on this. We need a federal government that is going to move on this and set those standards, which I'm glad to hear that you're pushing for. And I think more and more people, not just the young folks who are taking their time out on Friday saying, no more, you need to protect me and I'm gonna be part of the Sunrise Movement, but people who are showing up and saying, protect my grandchildren. People are saying, protect my opportunity to work in the future, because I don't know that there's going to be an opportunity in the energy world that I grew up in. And I think the more you talk about this and the more everybody talks about all of this, that the more it becomes part of the conversation and not just two questions that are asked during a debate.
Right.
It absolutely must be a full debate, and it absolutely must be a underscore bright line that this is the issue broadly that will hopefully be why we elect the next president of the United States.
So we unfortunately have to wrap up, and You all have my email and contact information. Would love to continue the conversation. Beto, do you want to maybe just say a few closing words? And then, like I said, I'm totally accessible. So, because we want to hear more. I think that one of the most important points out of this and what we're taking back is this issue of climate justice. I think it is completely left out from a lot of the conversations. And this is an area, especially, that you all are on the front lines of, and we can be, I think, sounding boards or vehicles for your voices nationally. So, Beto, what do you want to close?
I'm sorry, can I just say one more thing
Yeah.
before we leave?
Yeah.
The thing that Logan didn't talk about is that it's not just a climate justice issue, is it is a hacking of our democracy. In this debate over the natural gas peaker plant, in which we were able to prove potentially that solar or other forms of energy were going to meet the energy needs of our city, even though we had hundreds of people who were ready to show up, the utility at its last stand hired actors to block citizens from showing up to a public meeting.
It was on John Oliver.
It was a hacking of our entire democracy, and it is because in the 1970s plants that are retiring now are the last stands for the fossil fuel and utilities to make their money, and they will stand at nothing. They will stop at nothing to do that, and that includes hijacking our democracy. That includes hijacking presidential campaigns.
Yes.
So we are aware of this. It is a regulatory issue. We are all paying attention to it, and we will not let anyone who wants our vote to be beholden to these companies, because they are ruining the fabric of our country.
Thank you.
Can I say one thing that I would love to mention? In regards to traditional, we have a tradition that we have a storm, and then we declare a state of emergency. And in regards to the environment, this is not going to work. We have to declare the state of emergency before the storm, right? Because if we declare it after the storm, it's too late. And I think that's the only thing there is to this, that every force and every dollar and everything has to move towards the environment. And all these topics from environmental justice to subsidence here in the city, all the way to CO2 reduction. There's no way around it, and if we want to survive, that's it. That's what the next president has to do.
Really well said. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you each for spending some time and sharing with me your experience, your wisdom guiding the policies that you want to be able to implement as president, for reminding us that it has to start at the community level, and the facts, as you said, you can't look at them in the aggregate or globally. They have to be informed by a family, block, neighborhood, community by community basis if we're really going to get the solutions that we need. And Logan, for also meeting this with the urgency that requires it is literally every single facet of human life and existence going forward. Something that sharpened my urgency on this issue was reading a book called Uninhabitable Earth that, my kids are 12, 11, and 8. Their future is hell on this planet. What we're experiencing right now, the record number of heat-related deaths, those literally consumed by fire in Paradise, California, those who lost their lives in Katrina and every flood since then, that will pale in comparison to what our children will see over the course of their adult lives. And in the year 2050, my oldest, Ulysses, will not even be my age. He won't be 46 years old yet, and he's going to be looking back on this moment. And that's why I'm in it. That's why I'm here with you. I fear his judgment, and he will know whether we fuck this up and consigned him to a hell that I can only imagine, or whether we have made him proud. And it will require the leadership that I'm seeing and meeting and listening to here today to answer that question in the affirmative. And the really good questions about great ideas, you get into office, how in the hell are you going to make this happen? It would have to be the same constituency that won the election that would drive the policy and ensure that it's implemented. And one of the reasons that, bless you, one of the reasons that I love the ambition that I heard described here today, I love the ambition of the Green New Deal, is that it calls our attention not just to the urgency or to the crisis or to the threat, although it certainly does, but also to our aspirations to greatness, that we tell our kids that this was our defining moment of truth. We were going to make or break humanity at this moment, and we were up to the challenge. That's what I feel listening to your stories, and some of them are really tough to hear. The injustice that we see, families who borne the brunt of this, not just during our living lifetimes, but for the lifetime of this country, as you mentioned, for the last 300 years. And yet, if we were to give up, we'd be giving up on the generations that follow, and there's no way in the world I'm going to do that. So, in whatever capacity, as your nominee, as your president, or just as your fellow American, I'm going to do everything I can to work with you to make sure that we meet this, the greatest of all challenges, and that we do it together. And so I just want to thank you for making this day and this meeting possible. Very, very grateful. Yeah. Appreciate it.
We have a lot of food left over there, so please